season. Next, China has flown warplanes close to the island of Taiwan, which it claims as its own territory, in advance of an expected controversial visit to Taipei by Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the US House of Representatives. Taiwan's Defence Ministry says it has a full grasp of military activities near the island and is determined to defend itself against any Chinese threats. Our Asia-Pacific editor Celia Hatton has the story.
Nancy Pelosi, the third-ranking U.S. official, all smiles in Malaysia. But behind the scenes, the apparent next stop on her Asian tour to Taiwan is so risky that it's shrouded in secrecy. Ms. Pelosi's team hasn't confirmed she's even visiting the self-ruled island. But that hasn't stopped China from issuing stark warnings.
We have repeatedly and unmistakably expressed to the US our strong opposition to Speaker Pelosi's potential visit to Taiwan, and we hope that US officials will be very clear about the importance and sensitivity of this issue and how dangerous it could be.
Tensions over Taiwan date back to 1949, when the Communist Revolution forced the then ruling party, the KMT, to flee to the nearby island of Taiwan. Over the decades, Taiwan's built itself into a self-ruled democracy, but Beijing still considers Taiwan to be its own. China's leader, Xi Jinping, has put the reunification of Taiwan and mainland China at the top of his agenda, pledging that it's part of China's great rejuvenation. In Taiwan, many are welcoming a potential visit from Nancy Pelosi. They say it makes them feel less isolated. But on the island, they're still left to consider how they'd defend themselves if China really invaded. Preparation drills are becoming a way of life.
Because of the war in Ukraine, we have to be more prepared. To put it bluntly, we are quite scared, because there's no way of knowing if the war will also come here.
Taiwan, it's thought, is an island caught between two rival superpowers. Even without a visit from Nancy Pelosi, the need for such shelters isn't going away. Celia Hatton, BBC News.
Well, let's speak to Margaret MacMillan, Emeritus Professor of International History at the University of Oxford and Engelsberg Chair at LSE Ideas. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So what do you make of this escalation of tensions of this visit, which hasn't even happened yet, is about to happen in the next few minutes?
It couldn't be worse timing. I don't know why she feels she has to go there right now. It's clear that her own president and the administration don't want her to go. They wish that she wouldn't go. I mean, things are tense with China anyway between the United States, and the United States is also dealing with a major crisis in Ukraine. And I think it's just unfortunate timing. Of course, she has a right to go where she wants. But given the sensitivities that the Chinese feel about Taiwan, it just seems to me a very bad moment for her to do it.
Well, what about the flip side of that is you can't be seen, from her point of view, to be giving in to bullying behaviour from China.
That is the problem, and China has been bullying, and its stance in the world, I think, has been one that has not really served it well. It's been aggressive, it's been bullying, but let's remember that this ambiguity over Taiwan has existed really ever since 1972 when Nixon met Mao, and it has actually served both countries well. China hasn't pushed its reunification, although it talks, of course, rhetorically about it, and the United States has never made it clear whether or not it would defend Taiwan. And I think, in a way, it would be, at the moment, particularly good for that sort of ambiguity to continue for a bit.
Yeah, that deliberate kind of foreign policy of ambiguity has worked, as you said. But has the calculation of Ukraine and Russia's behaviour in Ukraine altered the equation at all?
It has, and I think it's altered in a number of ways. I mean, it's I think, made countries in the West, including, of course, those in such as Japan, feel that they can't give way to aggression from other countries, that it would lead to even more aggression. I mean, Putin seems to show no signs of wanting to stop in Ukraine, and so I think it has sent a real ripple of fear among Western countries and a determination on the part of a lot of them to actually be firm and standing up to aggression. What's also happened, I think, is that the trouble that Russia has run into Ukraine, in Ukraine, here is a great power which is taking on a much smaller one and yet is doing very badly indeed and taking great losses, is also, I think, worrying for the Chinese. They must be wondering whether they will meet that sort of resistance should it come to it in Taiwan, and what it would mean for China. So I think it is a combination of apprehension about what China might do, perhaps encouraged by what Russia's doing, but also perhaps apprehension in China about whether it might turn out to be not all that successful.
And should we just take a step back a little bit? I don't want to get into kind of hypotheticals too much here, but for people joining this kind of freshly, what's the worry here for the Chinese? What is the kind of, not the worst case scenario, but what could China do which would be an outcome that has people particularly worried?
I think China could try to invade Taiwan. It's been building up its naval strength hugely in the last few years. It's been spending a lot on its defense budget. It's been carrying out exercises with its Navy, with its naval aircraft, with submarines in the waters around Taiwan. It's made it very clear that it regards Taiwan as part of China. And I think you get a sense from China that its patience is running out. It doesn't want to continue this ambiguous position of Taiwan, that it really wants to firmly reunite Taiwan with the rest of China. And the danger, of course, is that the United States might respond. And we always have the danger with two big powers when they have nuclear weapons that any tension between them, any war between them could escalate. And so I think we're looking at a very serious situation.
Interesting. And Margaret, just so you know, and so viewers at home know, this is a live feed that's on the screen at the same time as you are, of a plane that has just landed in Taipei, capital there of Taiwan. We don't know 100% that it is the plane carrying Nancy Pelosi. It may, of course, just be coincidence, a different plane landing at the same time. But we are expecting her arrival at around now-ish. So there is a chance that that very plane we've seen land there is the actual one. Let's go back to the kind of more current events. The secrecy with which this visit, if this is it happening right now, was interesting. She released the schedule for her tour of Asia, didn't she? Which listed a long list of countries, but not Taiwan. What do you read into that?
Well, I'm wondering how word got out that she was contemplating going to Taiwan, and that seems to me that it could have come either from the Taiwanese themselves or possibly from people around Nancy Pelosi. What I find interesting is the reaction of the President Joe Biden, who has not said don't go, but has said I really would prefer you don't go at this time, which doesn't bode well for unity among the Democratic administration when it comes to Taiwan. And so it's difficult to know, I think, at the moment, who is letting this come out. And if she is indeed landing there now, I think we're all going to have to take a deep breath and wait and see.
And we've covered a little bit of the Chinese threat in your eyes. What about the abilities of Taiwan to defend itself, firstly, on its own, and secondly, if it did draw in an international response? What would that look like?
Well, attacking across water, as we know, is difficult. And when you think of D-Day, in July 1944, when you think of the huge amount of Allied force that was poured into crossing what was a relatively small body of water. And at its narrowest point, I believe, Taiwan is something like 90 miles from the Chinese mainland. So the Chinese would be taking on a really formidable challenge in tackling something that far across. And although they've been building up their Navy, I don't think they've been building up perhaps as much as they need landing craft. And so really, I think that the question would be, can the Chinese project their power? And of course, they have a great deal of power. And what do the Taiwanese have to meet it with? And Taiwan is mountainous in large parts. The Taiwanese have been building defenses. They've been digging in, and they've been getting up-to-date material from the United States. Now, perhaps in the long run, Taiwan wouldn't have a chance against a very much bigger and better armed China. But then, as you say, the question would be, what does the United States do? Does it let Taiwan be invaded? Does it let Taiwan become part of China as the Chinese government wishes without doing anything? And what does that do for the American position in the Pacific and among its allies?
Interesting. Margaret, just so you know as well, we are watching a plane taxiing in the airport. We are pretty confident that that is the plane carrying Nancy Pelosi, touching down there in Taipei. And so you can see it's pretty dark. It's pretty late at night there. The time there actually in Taiwan at the moment is 10:47 p.m. So the plane is still moving at the moment. We will see where it parks up and where we then, if we get a shot at a camera angle close enough to see people getting off the plane. But we are pretty sure that Nancy Pelosi is on board. I want to go back to a phrase that you used, we hold our breath. You are clearly concerned about this. What do you think people in Taiwan feel about this visit?
What the newspaper reports are saying, and I've been looking at them today, like I guess like a lot of us have been, is that people in Taiwan are very worried. They're very much concerned that they're suddenly going to find themselves in a war, and of course they've been paying attention to what's going on in Ukraine, as a lot of people around the world have. But they've been paying attention with a particular sort of relevance to themselves, and there will be those in Taiwan, as there always have been, who would rather not see Taiwan resist China, who would like to see Taiwan as part of China. It's a very tricky issue for the Taiwanese because they do feel themselves, many of them, I think, to be part of the greater Chinese civilization. So I think they're divided over their reactions towards the government in China. But I think increasingly, the evidence seems to be in recent elections and opinion polls, the Taiwanese see themselves as Chinese in civilization, but different from China in terms of politics and wanting to remain that way. They are a very vibrant democracy. And
what parallels can we draw here with Hong Kong? Because Hong Kong has been in the headlines, particularly here in the UK, given obviously the historical context and the historical connections. And we've watched the change in political structure in Hong Kong. And many activists that I've been speaking to, just even in the last few weeks, have been saying that Hong Kong, as we know it, is now gone. Are there any parallels here to be drawn between Chinese behaviour with Hong Kong and Chinese behaviour with Taiwan?
Well, if I was Taiwanese, I'd be very, very worried, because what the Chinese have done in Hong Kong is crush, basically, independent voices, have crushed civil society, have made it impossible for Hong Kong to maintain its human rights and its democratic privileges, in spite of what the Chinese said. When the agreement was signed with the British, they did indicate, promise, in fact, that Taiwan would continue, at least for a time, to have elections and freedom of speech and other democratic rights. And I think the Taiwanese have been watching what's happened to Hong Kong with intense interest, because it doesn't bode well for them. I think in a way the Chinese have made a strategic mistake with Hong Kong. If they had treated it differently and allowed it an amount of freedom and allowed it to continue to be what it was, a very vibrant place, not fully democratic, but certainly moving in that direction, I think a lot of people in Taiwan would have been reassured. But I think the Chinese treatment of Hong Kong, has made a lot of people in Taiwan think, well, that's what's waiting for us.
Stay there for us. I just want to update us with what's happening. We're just taking you out of the screen at the moment, Margaret, just for a moment, because we have the plane door open. This is the aircraft that's been carrying Nancy Pelosi, the senior US Democrat, and it has touched down, and people are now getting off the plane. It's pretty dark, as I said. It is, kind of 10 to 11-ish at night there. So we will see, there are quite a few people getting off, as you can see. So we're waiting to see if Nancy Pelosi herself gets off. It might be a little bit tricky to identify her in the dark, but this is the moment it looks like this visit is taking off, because up until now there was lots of speculation about whether it would happen, whether it wouldn't happen. It didn't appear on any official flight schedule, and actually the schedule, just so you know, is quite busy. Started in Singapore, this tour of Asia. It's flown actually now from the Malaysian capital, Kuala Lumpur, crossing Borneo and the Philippines, heading north along Taiwan's east coast, and is now at the airport. And we can kind of see a delegation of officials, it looks like, approaching the side of the aeroplane there. Interesting to see what reception will be given here, because clearly it's quite late and one would assume it would be straight back to the hotel and sleep, but there may be official engagements already. There may be this official reception. Don't know who is there from the Taiwanese side, so we wait to see if and when it will be light enough to actually see we can crane. This could be Nancy Pelosi walking down the steps right now. So Nancy Pelosi there getting to the bottom of the steps, it seems, and being met there. You can see the flash bulbs of cameras, which could be helpful for us to try and see something. But a huge moment, this. Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, and her own president, Biden, a Democrat, would rather this visit wasn't going ahead at this time. There have been others within the administration and within the US, I should point out, for balance, who are actually saying this visit should go ahead. There have been similar visits in the past at this level. Nancy Pelosi, of course, is a member of the legislature in the US, not part of the executive, not part of the government, not part of President Biden's team. This isn't an official, if you like, diplomatic trip in that sense. Of course, the reason it's sensitive, as we know, is because the US has diplomatic ties with China, not with Taiwan. It does have other relations with Taiwan, but it does not have official diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And that is the way that China wants it, and that is the way that China insists it must stay under its one China policy. And that's why China has been given these furious warnings, warning that Nancy Pelosi should not visit. But it seems now she has, and she has touched down. Let's get the reaction of Professor Margaret MacMillan to that moment. Professor.
Well, let's hope it isn't one of those historic moments when we all look back and say, oh, that really was the beginning of something. I was thinking, of course she has a right to go to Taiwan if she wants. I wish she'd done it and then we'd heard about it. I think the Chinese might have reacted better. I think what we have to ask ourselves now is, what is the Chinese government going to do? And will it change their stance, among other things, on Ukraine? The Chinese have not condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but they have not sold them weapons. They haven't really egged them on in Ukraine. They haven't shown wholehearted support for them. I wonder if that will change. I think.
I'm sorry to jump in, just, but that's really, really interesting, because I was going to ask you. My next question was, right, it's happened now. What are the options facing China? They could go for full-scale invasion. Less than that, though, what are their options? You seem to be pointing, well, one of them in retaliation could be a change of stance, decide, actually, we're going to help Russia, we're not going to support Ukraine.
I think that's absolutely possible. I think they will protest vociferously to the United States, and I think the United States will try, to mollify China, but it's going to be difficult because Taiwan has been such an issue, and the current leader in China, Xi Jinping, has made it such an issue. And the other thing, of course, is he has this big party Congress coming up in the fall where he is expecting to be anointed as essentially president for life. And can he afford not to look tough about this?
Interesting. And on Nancy Pelosi, what do you think is her motivation here for doing this?
Well, I've been asking myself that. She's always been a hawk on China. She's always been, very, very critical of China on its record on human rights. I mean, the Democrats have, always supported human rights. And so I think she probably feels that she has every right to go and show support for a democracy in Asia. The other possibility, and I'm only speculating here, is that she is probably reaching the stage when people are beginning to wonder when she's going to retire. I can't remember what her age is, but she is, I think, fairly old to continue in this very high-profile position as Speaker of the House, and it may well be that she wants to show that she is a statesman of world order by going on such a tour. But really, the timing of this tour, I think, is very unfortunate.
And let's quickly touch on the significance of Taiwan, because it is a relatively small island off the coast of China. But the US interest there is not just military and strategic and historical, it's economic too.
Well, Taiwan is one of the great producers of microchips, and China is of course, and one of the things that's been slowing down Western economic growth recently has been the difficulty in getting microchips. Anyone who's trying to buy a new car will be aware of that, or a lot of consumer equipment. And so I think Taiwan is very important in the supply chain for high tech. And it's also, I think, important as a symbol of American determination to remain a Pacific power. And if the Americans back down over Taiwan, what does that say to the Japanese? What does that say to the Vietnamese? What does that say to the South Koreans? So Taiwan represents more than just a small island or smallish island.
And what do you think we're going to hear now from the US? Because we've heard those warnings from China. Now the visit has happened. We wait to see the response of China, whether that's in words or in actions. But then we will inevitably be asking the White House and authorities in the US, what will be their response now?
I think the American administration is in a very difficult position. I mean, can they afford to disown the speaker, their speaker of the House of Representatives, and someone who has been in politics a very long time and is widely seen as a leading Democrat? For them now to condemn her for doing this, I think is very difficult indeed. And so I think what they're going to have to try and do is show support for one of their own without alienating or infuriating the Chinese anymore. And that may be a very difficult path to tread indeed.
Professor Margaret MacMillan, thank you so much for being with us here on BBC News Channel, witnessing and talking us through, with your expertise, a potentially historic moment. As you said, you hope it's not, but also, as you said, we hold our breath. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, now let's take a break and have a look at the weather. Here's Helen.
Good afternoon. We started the day with more cloud around and some welcome rain. The rain is tending to ease away now. The intensity of the showers on this weather front sinking southwards are easing. We will continue to see some showers in the north and west, but some sunshine coming out now east of the Grampians, eastern parts of Northern Ireland. Temperatures here into the mid-20s, so warmer than yesterday, but a windy day. But despite that, 29-30 in the south, really quite a muggy feel. And those brisk winds continue through the night to blow further low cloud and drizzle into southern and western areas, further showers in the north. So with all that cloud around and that breeze, it will be a warm night again, and particularly uncomfortable for sleeping with the high humidity still hanging on in southern areas. Still there actually through Wednesday, with a few showers before that finally starts to break up and the skies brighten. More showers to come again in the north and the west, and a slightly fresher day across Scotland and Northern Ireland, slightly less windy further south.
Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. The headlines. US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi touches down in Taiwan despite a Chinese threat that America will pay the price for her visit. US President Joe Biden confirms the head of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, has been killed by a drone strike in Kabul.
He made videos, including in recent weeks, calling for his followers to attack the United States and our allies. Now, justice has been delivered, and this terrorist leader is no more.
Liz Truss scraps a plan to link public sector pay to local living costs following a backlash from a number of senior Conservatives.
But what I want to be clear about is I will not be going ahead with the regional pay boards. That is no longer my policy.
As energy bills soar, BP reports £6.9 billion in quarterly profits, its highest in 14 years. Police have charged a 20-year-old man with treason after he was arrested in the grounds of Windsor Castle on Christmas Day. Hello, welcome to the programme. First, the Speaker of the US House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, has just flown into Taiwan, which is claimed by China as its own territory. Her visit, which is not backed by the White House, is the first by such a senior US official in decades. Tensions with China are high. Beijing has repeatedly warned against the visit, and this morning it said the US would pay the price. Well, already China has held live firing drills and sent warplanes up to the informal dividing line in the Taiwan Strait between the Chinese mainland and Taiwan, which is self-ruled but seen by Beijing as a breakaway province. Taiwan's defense ministry says it's determined to defend itself. Well, let's go live to Taiwan. This is the capital, Taipei. A plane carrying the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has just touched down in the capital. There we saw her land, get off the plane and head into the airport. Meanwhile, China flew warplanes close to the island of Taiwan, which it claims is its territory, as I mentioned, in advance of this trip. Joined now by our China editor, Howard Zhang. Howard, extraordinary moments that we just witnessed in the last 20 minutes or so. What's your reaction to them?
I guess the biggest question now in everybody's head is what's going to happen next. Yes, the plane touched down and China's said all the harsh words and loud warnings. Now we've seen warplanes being sent circling. But what next? From the Beijing's perspective, they claims this is a continued U.S. salami slicing at quote-unquote the one China policy, hollowing out the one China policy. But from Washington's perspective, although there's no White House direct approval of this flight and there's no authorization, but from most U.S. politicians, especially since the Ukraine war, they need to stand strong and support a democratic ally. And so we have two competing narratives and perspectives. And what will happen next? Which side will do what next is I guess, the biggest question.
And given, obviously, you know China so well, what do you make of the fact that the rhetoric was so strong ahead of this visit? Because the calculation must have been, well, either they think it's going to happen or they think it's not going to happen. They will have had their assumptions. Say, for example, hypothetically, they assumed, actually, we think this Nancy Pelosi visit is going to happen, and they still came out with those words that this is playing with fire. Have China now either backed themselves into a corner where if they back down, they appear weak and they have to act, or done exactly, given themselves the justification that they wanted to take some sort of action? If we look back at history, Taiwan has always been the core issue between Beijing and Washington, especially since 1979 when the two had some type of a rapprochement and normalized relations. And but they always held two different interpretations. During good times, when two sides were trading normally and Taiwan issue were put aside. But now, especially when many on Beijing side, if you talk to the scholars and people start to see their perspective that they see a potential conflict, a potential confrontation of some sort with U.S. may not be inevitable. That's why they're, seeing more and more aggressive and coming up with rhetorics. And whether this is the time they will push through with some of the rhetorics, we don't know. That's still wait and see. Howard, stay there for us, because I just want to explain the pictures that we're seeing. Our viewers are watching at home, because it's pretty dark and pretty difficult to see. But basically, we watched the plane land about 20 minutes ago or so, and then we saw there, and you can just see in the pink there, Nancy Pelosi, who got off the plane, walked down the stairs, and was greeted by a large number of officials there, as we can see. And these pictures there bring us up to date. This was kind of 10 minutes or so ago, when she then walked into the airport building. And we've actually got now a tweet from Nancy Pelosi. So let's just take a look at this. Our delegation's visit to Taiwan honours America's unwavering commitment to supporting Taiwan's vibrant democracy. Our discussions with Taiwan leadership reaffirm our support for our partner and promote our shared interests, including advancing a free and open Indo-Pacific region. Howard, your thoughts on that? That's exactly what I was describing. Beijing side, they keep saying they have the overall authority and the government of whole of China, including Taiwan, and on U.S. side. And, U.S. saying, well, okay, we're not disputing with your one China policy anymore, but we're supporting a vibrant democracy, which is a policy Washington has also made very clear. So what will happen next is the million-dollar question. And we have a second tweet, Howard. I want to get your reaction to this as well. America's solidarity with the 23 million people of Taiwan is more important today than ever as the world faces a choice between autocracy and democracy. a reference to Ukraine, perhaps?
Exactly. And it's worth reminding, I think, some of the audience, just 2 weeks before the Ukraine war, President Xi Jinping and President Putin signed a bilateral agreement for collaboration or cooperation with no limits. And 2 weeks after that, the world saw a war. And most people worry whether that will be extended to Taiwan on Taiwan side. And hence the US is standing strong this time. But what will Beijing do next?
Interesting. And we may have some more here just from Nancy Pelosi again. So this is clearly a Twitter thread on social media. Let's just take a look. Our visit is one of several congressional delegations to Taiwan, and it in no way contradicts long-standing United States policy guided by the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979. China joint communiques and the 6 assurances. The United States continues to oppose unilateral efforts to change the status quo. That's the interesting phrase that we have heard in the last couple of weeks as well. Could you just talk us through what that means?
That's one of the main contentions as well, because on Beijing side, they contend that the agreement back in '79 was that U.S. will maintain substantial but unofficial links and ties with Taiwan. They consider the House Speaker is an official link. Hence, this is the major contention here.
Howard, thank you so much for talking us through that and giving us so much crucial context there. Do stand by because we can go live now to Steve McDonald, my colleague in Beijing. Hi, Steve. So Nancy Pelosi has just touched down and we're expecting now some reaction.
Well, we're already getting reaction from Beijing. I mean, it's interesting the extent to which the threats here have been all about the military. So the Chinese government has said that the People's Liberation Army would not just stand idly by while Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Now, what constitutes an appropriate military response from Beijing, which wouldn't be seen as kind of weak and empty in terms of a response, given that you've said that the PLA is going to act? Around about the same time that Nancy Pelosi landed in Taiwan, local media here was flashing news that Chinese fighter jets were crossing the Taiwan Strait. Now, this is not totally unusual. I mean, Beijing does this often, but in recent times, they've been getting closer and closer. So perhaps they'll cross this important line in the middle of the Taiwan Strait. Maybe they'll fly closer than they otherwise would have. But there has to be some sort of a military response over the next 24 hours, and maybe we will see more of this type of thing. I mean, it's interesting in terms of the responses from the Chinese government. You were talking about the tweets before. Well, this from China's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying, who also tweeted out a whole bunch of things at the same time that Nancy Pelosi was. So from Hua Chunying, the US and Taiwan have made provocations together first, whereas China has been compelled to act in self-defense. Any countermeasures to be taken by China would be justified and a necessary response to the US oblivion to China's repeated démarches and the US's unscrupulous behaviour. So more threats of a military response coming from the Chinese government. We'll just have to see, what this amounts to in the next day or so, though.
Yeah, and Stephen, I want to be really careful here. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We don't want to get into the world of hypotheticals, and we don't want to be too alarmist. But just given your knowledge and your background there, what are the kind of options that you think China will be looking at now and it views retaliation? What options are kind of open to it, and what's your sense of what they could do?
I mean, realistically, you'd have to think that they don't want to, provoke an actual shootout with the US or Taiwan or something like that, especially in the run-up to the Party Congress when Xi Jinping is going to be moving into his historic third term in just a couple of months. Options, though, would include, as I said before, flying jets closer to Taiwan, maybe, increased war game activity. They've already flagged that there are 2 different sets of war games going on in the sea at the moment. Perhaps doing a few things that have been unexpected. There's already all over social media here footage of various troop mobilisations in the south of China. I think that much of this is kind of for show, though, just to sort of allow the PLA to flex its muscles a little bit. And so, yeah, we don't want to be suggesting to people that this is really going to be an attempt to retake Taiwan by force tomorrow or anything like that. But the danger, of course, in all of these actions is that at some point, with all this significant military hardware moving around in that part of the world, from the US and mainland China and Taiwan, that at some point there might be miscalculation. You imagine a miscommunication, or someone fires too close to someone else, and next thing you know there's retaliation, and then you're getting into some pretty dangerous territory then.
OK, Stephen, we will leave it there. Thank you so much for bringing us that update there from Beijing. Thank you.